go live. Hit the go live button. Okay, it says we're live. Let me make a little posty post in announcements. Close my notifications. Copy. Come, Gert, come get your questions answered. Published. Yeah, Git does not have an. I've been immersing in Simlish recently.
Ah, yes. That or gobbledygook.
Oh, that's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, okay, we are live. We're going.
Okay.
Actually, let me just really quickly double check, because for some reason the little window that like shows me that I'm live is just black.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to check that we're live. Go to channel. It says live. And I see us, and you just said gobbledygook. So we're good. We're live. Okay. Hello, everybody.
Hi,
Welcome
everybody.
to March's Q&A stream. It feels like it's very late this month. It's almost the end of the month. I don't know, but I guess it is the last Thursday, third Thursday. I don't even know at this point.
Who knows?
How are you, Ethan?
I'm doing pretty good. So for those of you that watched the New Year's live stream, you know that my goal for the first quarter of the year was to be more social, because I'd basically just been like heads down on Refold for years and didn't have enough friends here in the city. So I did that for a couple months. And now I'm like, okay, I'm ready to get back to work and like go hard again. But now I have like all of these residual social things that keep popping up. So this weekend I have 5 different plans with 5 different groups.
Blasted friends.
I know. I mean, and like they're all going to be fun, but that's a lot. Like I'm not going to be rested at all on Monday.
It's that type of fun where you're like, I know if I go, it's going to be great and I'm going to have a good time. I don't want to go.
No, I do want to go. I'm just like, I'm going to be tired on Monday. Like, I'm not going to get like a resting weekend.
I mean, is that always the worst thing? You have worked a lot.
I have, but you know, sometimes I want to get back to working more, and I feel like I haven't been doing that recently just because I've had other focuses. So.
Well, you did good with your focuses, though, it sounds like.
Yeah, no, I did the thing that I set my mind to, but no, I have a new focus.
Speaking of new focus, how is immersion going? How is your learning?
Yeah, so also for those on the New Year's live stream, you'll know that I burned out on language learning for a little while. I really just burned out on life in general, and basically took a break from it, and then as I mentioned, like Spanish was not a priority for Q1. What I was really hoping to do is time it. So a little behind the scenes, we've been working on an app internally, and I wanted to time my like restart into Spanish with the app being available. So I've been using it for like 2 weeks or so now. It's definitely still a rough cut, but I've been enjoying using it. I've been enjoying tracking my time. I think I have like 15 hours tracked at this point. So that's been exciting. I'm excited to get that into the hands of the team and then the community at large.
So you're the Refold app guinea pig?
I am the guinea pig. Yes, exactly.
All the issues go through you and you complain about them to yourself?
I know I post about them and ping Lindsay on them.
Oh, right. Yeah. I don't think you're not actually coding it, right?
No, I did some DevOps last week, but and I probably will get back into the coding side once I get back up to speed on things.
Cool. Well, should we answer some questions?
Yeah, I was going to ask you how your immersion is going, or how your language learning is going.
That's a question, I guess. Great, actually. I'm currently writing my 1-year update for Czech, and it's in the last couple of weeks. There's been a bit of a shift because kind of before that, I was a bit doom and gloom, and that sort of point where you sort of feel a little bit lower on your understanding, and I was like, oh, I'm never going to get there. Mm-hmm. But then in the past couple of weeks, I've been watching a lot of just free flow YouTube without subs or anything like that, and understanding a very large amount and really enjoying it.
Awesome.
And so it's reinvigorated my my interest in it, and thinking about things like I'm going to start speaking and outputting at 1,000 hours in July. And I'm also realized that I'm going to push from 700 to 1,000 hours in 100 days, which is going to be like basically another 40% of my immersion time to get there. And so I feel like I'm totally going to be able to do it. Like I don't no longer feel like it's an out of reach goal, because I've conceptualized actually how much further I'm going to go, what I'm going to be doing. And so, yeah, I'm really excited, actually.
Nice.
And yeah, I think one of the big things is doing crosstalk. I've been doing crosstalk
Cool.
as much as I
You
can.
working with a tutor?
Not much. No, just language partners.
Oh, nice. Awesome. Where'd you find
actually Hello Talk.
Yeah,
I actually just recorded the video yesterday that I've been working on for a while on like how to go about doing that, because it can be hard and frustrating, because when you only get responses from like 3 out of 10 people, and like at 1 out of 20 people actually get into a call with you, it can be a little disheartening. So I have a couple of tactics that I've used to make it easier that I'm sharing in this video that should be coming out in, I've got a lot of videos in the pipeline right now, so like maybe in a month.
Okay.
But I'm excited for the video. I think it's
cool.
got some really good tips,
Nice.
and I've been enjoying it. So let's get into some questions from the community, though.
Yeah, let's do it.
And the most popular question this week comes from Shitos or Shetus. That name sounds familiar. I feel like we talked about it last time. I don't know. This question was from more recently, and it was, what's the best approach for making content for beginners? I've been considering creating content to help learners immerse themselves in my native language. However, the most daunting aspect has been making suitable content for beginners. I have a rough idea of what might work: write short stories using basic vocabulary, some visuals, but the problem lies in how much to simplify grammar and odd-sounding sentence, or how much to simplify grammar, vocab. Do I make kind of odd-sounding sentences, all that sort of stuff? And then how do I prioritize the entertainment aspect of it so that people don't find it incredibly dull? And this is a question that I've specifically been thinking about a lot. I think you think about it a lot less. But do you want to have any thoughts just right off the top of your head, and then I'll take it from there?
No, Ben has been begging me to let him spend working hours making beginner content for English and other languages.
Not working hours.
Okay. Either way.
It's off the clock.
Inside, outside, whatever it is. Because he has very strong opinions about this. And what we found is with our course, we collected a whole bunch of comprehensible input and simplified input for the learners, but there's really not that much of it. And things that are labeled as comprehensible input are often not, which has been a really disheartening for most of the languages. And so I'll turn it over to Ben because he has very strong opinions about this.
Yeah, the biggest thing that I would recommend, and that I've been doing myself, is to minimize the time that you spend not like actually producing language. And so that's anything that's like posting videos, editing things, anything that's not literally making that content live, if that makes any sense. So what I'm trying to say is, if you want to make a 10-minute video, try to only spend 15 total minutes of your time doing that thing, because with content, you need a lot of it, right? A lot of these CI channels make 10 minutes per week, and that's going to take freaking forever to get to a point where somebody can actually use that content to make noticeable progress in the language. The Czech channel that I use, which was very good, only had like 15 hours, 20 hours of content that I could use, and I blew through that in like a month, using it 5 times. And so finding a balance between good content and really low effort is really important if you actually want to go far with it. I've seen so many channels that end up with like 5 or 6 videos because they're just spending so much time to make one short video that it's not worth it. And so a lot of improv skills and being comfortable with sort of doing things live but recorded is important for just a general ability, and focusing on that efficiency aspect. I also highly recommend that you start not with beginner content, but with advanced or intermediate content, and then work backwards. because beginner content is the hardest content to make, especially super beginner content. Because like you said, how it's weird. Like you have to figure out how to use your language naturally, but also easily and have enough visuals. And so start with the things that are easy for you to do just to get in the habit of it and make it a process, and then start going backwards from there. I've got a bunch more tips, but I think those are the two most important things. Actually, there is one more. When you try to set up how you're going to do it, don't think that you need to necessarily draw things. A lot of people spend way too much time trying to draw pretty bad pictures on a whiteboard that is not very interesting. So using images or AI generated images are great and free now. Anything that's visual on your computer or on a tablet or something is usually a lot easier to use than trying to actually draw, even if that's sort of the OG method. If you're a good artist, go ahead, but it's a different skill to learn that you don't necessarily want to need to practice. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I'll leave it there. But
my thought on this is, first you should decide what type of content you want to create, whether it's comprehensible input or simplified input. And the difference between that is comprehensible provides additional context, whether that's images or additional explanation or acting that provides context for the language, so that you, the viewer, can actually intuit or guess what the words mean. Whereas simplified content is just you are speaking slowly and simply. Simplified is easier than comprehensible, because comprehensible you have to like decide what context you want to add. But I think a pretty easy hybrid that Ben just mentioned is just throwing images, like either AI generated or open source AI. Images, whatever.
You said the Spanish order.
Did I? Okay. I said I. If you just do the simplified input method where you are talking about a topic and then you go back through and watch it and decide, I am going to just put images throughout the entire video to add additional context, that's sort of an easy hack to produce comprehensible input without a huge amount of effort.
Mm-hmm. Or if you have like comic books and you can put those up on the screen, that can be a great thing to talk about because that already has a story built in. Mm-hmm. And that's actually what I've been doing with English. I've been making videos on comics, and it's been a lot easier because I can kind of just tell the story, act it out, talk about words, draw things. And so I definitely recommend finding something like that to go off of. But if you're going for even more beginner, then yeah, something as basic as just a slideshow with images will be great.
Along the same lines, one of my favorite genres on YouTube are video or movie and TV summaries. Mm-hmm. So someone just summarizes a movie in 10 minutes and all of the clips in it are from the movie and they're in order. So it's like, it's pretty straightforward to do that. And it seems to be legal because there are literally hundreds of channels doing this, and they're using the actual footage. I just watched one from Farid Diek, and he does a lot of movies, but he did a 3-part series on the Kung Fu Panda series and talked about like the philosophy in Kung Fu Panda. And
it's kind of fun.
He's like very into philosophy and psychology. And so I found it very entertaining. You could do that same thing, but just simplify the language or speak slowly.
And I'm not a lawyer, but I'm pretty sure there's a very strong case for fair use if you basically were just to go through a movie and explain like all the scenes, all the slang, all the words. And the biggest thing is that you're not taking, like, no native is going to watch your video about that instead of the movie. And that's one of the biggest things about copyright.
Yeah, totally educational purposes has a pretty substantial leeway in copyright law.
Cool. Anyways, that's a good question, but we can move on to something else. Thank you for the question, and I hope that's helpful. We have a question here from Adrian7, who says, does rewatching content help? Oh, I lost where it is on the screen. I don't have it on the screen. Hang on. I'll make a new one. At banner. Does rewatching content help? Hello, people. Yes. Oh, all right. Well, let's move on. Basically, this is asking about, there's tons of things in here. Rewatching, reusing stuff. They have a long post that looks pretty good, but I think we can hop to the point. Absolutely.
Yeah,
It's
rewatching is
especially
super helpful. Uh, you don't need to go overboard with it. I know that Lamont did a video where he watched Spider-Man like what, 50 times or 100
yeah,
times or
they
something.
referenced it in here. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
too many times, but
that's that's too many times. I would generally say 5-ish times in any like one sitting, and then coming back to it every few months is also really helpful because you will get more out of it in the future once you know more of the language.
hmm
So for me, one of the things that I advocate for people to do is create like a personal library of content that they've immersed with. And as they grow the library, eventually just going back to the beginning and going through it is really powerful because each time you come back to it, if you've given it a few months, you will get much more out of it the next time. And then 3 months later, you'll get more out of it the next time.
hmm
So
I
that's
made a
one approach.
video
Go for it.
a couple months ago about the multi-pass method, which is sort of what we call when you reuse the same piece of content in a couple of different ways, which is
Mm-hmm.
also really useful. Where the first time you read through it, the second time you free flow it, then you intensive, or whatever the order is. But having different ways to engage with content can also be really, really powerful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's something that I did a long time was multi-pass where I would watch it once intensive, and then I would create cards from that. I would review the cards for a week or 2 weeks, um, and then I would listen to it, the same audio. So that 1 to 2 week delay between the intensive
Mhm.
and the re-listen was really useful.
I also recommend having a sick movie or some like a day off movie or something like that that you've seen a couple times that's easy for you to immerse in, that you really enjoy. And then if you're sick one day or you just really can't put in like actual focus time, you just throw on that movie and you get an easy hour and 90 minutes of immersion or whatever it is. I found that really useful for a couple times in the past year when I got sick and I was like, okay, I can just watch this movie I've seen 5 or 6 times in check that I have ready to go. It takes me no extra effort to watch, and is already fairly comprehensible and just fun. So
Yeah,
I
I'm
definitely
surprised
recommend
you like
something
that
like
because
that.
you usually don't like that kind of thing of just like rewatching things just for no reason.
Yeah, I do.
Do you? I feel like we talked about this before. Like
Maybe
I will rewatch things all the time. So the series that I always fall back to is The Magicians because it's like 6 seasons, and anytime I'm like I can't decide what to do, I just
yeah.
like throw that on with the Spanish dub.
I I think I have a lower tolerance for it than a lot of people. Like some people that have seen The Office like 12 times, I
Yeah.
couldn't do. But there's definitely movies I've seen a bunch of times. I'm watching the Star Wars original trilogy right now,
Hmm.
that I've seen a bunch of times. I've read Harry Potter 20 times, I
Yeah, but
think.
you make fun of me every time I re-listen to Harry Potter or Sylvana Sin Lana.
That one I think I do make fun of because it's I don't know, but
It's great. I'm
it's
re-listening to it
also
right now.
yeah. I think there's also a lot of value for it in language learning, and so I get over it a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I do have like a bit of an internal clash every time I want to rewatch something. It's like, oh, I could just watch something new though.
Hmm.
But anyways,
Yeah.
yes, rewatching content is helpful. Do it. Use it a bunch of different ways.
But
Thank you
don't
for the
go
question.
overboard.
Yeah, man overboard. Okay, here's a good question. Why are there days when you can't understand anything? This question comes from Digital Diecast, and they say, I often immerse myself in media every day, such as watching
Hmm.
TV shows, movies, YouTube videos, or reading content on the internet. However, some days I find it difficult to understand what is being said, even with subtitles in my target language. This can last for up to 2 days, during which I need to replay the dialogue and put in a lot of mental effort to understand even a single video. However, after a while, my understanding returns to normal, and I'm curious why this happens.
Yeah. So a bit of a side tangent, but I saw, one of the things I do when I'm mindlessly scrolling is I watch YouTube shorts in Spanish. And there was a guy talking about his workouts and trying to gain muscle. And he said that when he first started his program, he was doing really, really well. And then he actually started to lose weight and lose strength. And in his research, he came across this concept of sort of like built up fatigue, where you need to take a certain rest time every now and again, just to give your body a chance to get back up to where it should be. And if you continue to push it after it's gone past that fatigue point, it requires a lot more energy and a lot more effort to do the thing, and you don't get as good results. It can even damage your results. Now, that's on a physical level. What we're talking about is more mental and psychological. But I think the same premise applies, where you do need to give yourself breaks to give yourself time to recover from all of the effort that you're putting in. So with his physical approach, with his workouts, what he did was every 5 weeks, he would do an off week. And the off week, he would still do all the same activities. He would just do half the weight. And so I think the same premise applies here. Your brain builds up fatigue over time. You're putting a lot of stress on your brain, and you do need to give it a break, whether that is taking a day off completely or whether that is just choosing much, much easier content that you definitely will understand and is super easy for you to understand, and giving yourself time to recover from that before jumping back into doing something really, really intense. So give yourself time to rest. As I mentioned in the New Year's live stream, rest is actually where the growth happens. It's not the activity itself, it's your recovery from the activity. Same thing is true in working out. Same thing is true in any mental activity. You need to give yourself time, your brain time, to synthesize the connections, cement them into place. And if you constantly keep hammering your brain and don't give it enough time to relax and to recover, those won't solidify.
Yeah, and there's also just, you have to keep in mind that every single day is not literally going to be 100% or going to be better necessarily, because there's just so much other fluctuation in your brain. Maybe you're just distracted, focused on something else, right? There's not only the sort of fatigue, but also just some days you're bad at native language, English hard today. Like there's just fluctuation as well. But I definitely agree that making sure, just don't be too hard on yourself. It'll come back. You didn't like lose brain cells or anything like that. Well, maybe, I don't know. Cool. Thank you for the question. Let's move on to the next one here, which comes from Entire Twix. And the summary of the question is, do computer-made errors in my input cause problems? I've been using Subtitle Edit to generate matching subs. It occasionally produces erroneous lines. I then upload the dub and matching subtitle file to Link for intensive immersion, during which I seem to catch most of the errors. After this, I use these corrected subtitles to generate cards with subs to SRS, and then only study the I+1 cards. Do you think that it's doing more harm than good if I'm, to some degree, consuming and memorizing corrupted input?
I mean, I think the fact that you're recognizing and correcting most of them yourself is good. I think that sort of removes the concern about memorizing corrupted input. There are definitely times when you will learn something wrong using input that is not correct. That being said,
you'll do that with input that is correct, though, too.
Potentially.
Like, you just remember something wrong pretty frequently. Natives make mistakes all the time.
Yeah, that's true. Like, sometimes I'll look at native content and the way they said the thing is wrong, or they used the wrong word. And that used to trip me up a lot more than it does now. Now I can usually be like, oh no, they meant this word instead. Mm-hmm. But yeah, in the past, there were definitely times when I would learn something and then I would come back to it a while later. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. So as you get more input, you will be able to correct those things. I would not recommend only using that kind of input. I would recommend using some like native content with subtitles if it's available to you. If not, I wouldn't worry about it too much. That being said, there's also the ability to like learn native things wrong, even if they are 100% correct. And that's something else that I've experienced, where I would learn a sentence and I thought I understood what it meant and how it worked. And then over time, as I saw it more and as I developed my own abilities, I would realize that my initial impression of that sentence was wrong in the first place. Mm-hmm. Those situations should sort themselves out over time, as long as the computer is not making like tons and tons of errors, and as long as you are not ignoring those errors entirely.
Yeah, I'm a little more on the side of just I think it doesn't matter at all because it's overwhelmingly correct. Sure, if it's like wrong 10 or 15% of the time, that's a pretty high number. But I think they're learning German, and I know it's like that's going to be less than 2%. And I like you're going to get bad input from non-native speakers, from native speakers, like as much of that time, like, and you figure it out because there's an overwhelming weight towards the correct version of it versus the incorrect. And like Ethan said, you'll come back a couple of months later and be like, oh, why is that like that? That's just wrong. I just can tell. And so I just really wouldn't worry about it, honestly. And like you said, it's pretty easy to see errors, even if you're like intermediate or even like an upper beginner. I see errors in my Czech transcriptions all the time, and I can usually just correct them myself. It's typically just using the wrong letter, like an S instead of a Z or something like that. But it's in some ways it can like train yourself a little bit more because you're like already have that intuition of that's not right. How do I fix it or whatever?
Yeah, the one caveat that I would add to this is that not everybody has that mentality or that sort of like a brain ability to notice those things that are wrong. A lot of people just trust whatever's in front of them, and I think that's dangerous. You should always be looking at the language and trying to analyze it and understand how it works. And when it doesn't make sense to you, don't let it solidify in your brain. Like understand that like this is something that does not make sense to me. I'm not going to just like practice this repeatedly at this point.
Yeah, I think that's the more important part there. Like let it go if it doesn't make sense, or if you have an intuition that you feel is correct, but like doesn't necessarily seem correct. Just feel free to let it go, and you can come back to it later when it's a lot easier, right? That sort of 60-second rule that we've said before, where it's like if something's taking you longer than 60 seconds to figure out, probably just move on. Come back to it later. Cool. Any other comments there?
Yep.
Great. Thank you for the question. The next question we have here is from Belagesa, which they ask, does continuous immersion reap more benefits than discontinuous immersion? And the actual question is going to clarify that a bit more. But let's say you have two different learners, and they both have about 1,000 hours of immersion, but they got there in two different ways. The first one spent 2 years focusing on language every single day and getting up to that 1,000 mark. And the second person got to 500 hours of immersion, took a break for a few months, and then, or a few years even, and then came back and did another 500 hours. So they're totally split up time or continuous time. Do you think both learners will have similar ability levels, or would one of those have an advantage?
I don't know, because we've heard anecdotes on both sides of this. We've heard anecdotes that people who do it continuously and actually like fully throw themselves into the language have faster results and better results. But we've also heard that people who take breaks come back to the language stronger than when they left it. And so we don't have strong data or strong anecdotes even in one direction or the other. I think in both of your examples, the amount of time per day is still pretty low. It's roughly an hour a day, I think, maybe even less.
Yeah, for 2 years to 1,000 hours is an hour and a half a day.
2 years, 1,000 hours.
Ish.
No,
I think it's a little less than that.
It would be 45 minutes a day. 700 days, 1,000 hours.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No. 700 days, 1 hour a day would be 700 hours. So you have to do a little more.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so closer to an hour and a half.
Okay, I'm wrong. Sorry. Can't do math. You're right.
But our brain cells got them together.
Yeah. Form of one competent adult. Anyway, so hour and a half is like relatively low. I think this would be kind of equivalent in both of those, because I don't think that an hour and a half a day is enough for you to like really shift your brain entirely over into the language at any point. I do think that there is benefit to doing significantly more than an hour a day, because it does really throw you into the language 100% and shift your mind over to it.
Like if this question was one person did 1,000 hours in 1 year and another person did 1,000 hours over 3 years, but there was a year break in between, that first person would pretty much clearly have a higher ability because they're just
Yeah.
a lot more intensive with it.
Yeah, exactly. Like I do think there is like 4 hours per day is likely more than 4 times as beneficial as 1 hour per day for some period of time.
Yeah.
I think there's diminishing returns on that. I think 8 hours per day is too much and
Mhm.
like is not 8x, but 4x I think is probably like a nice balance there. But if you're just sticking with the 1 hour per day or an hour and a half per day, split up into 2 versus 1 continuous, I don't think there would be significant difference between those two.
Yeah. I think that this question changes drastically depending on where in the process they are and like the number of hours, like we just said. Because like if this question was about like they started at 1,000 hours and then one of them took a break for 0 months and then kept going, and one took a break for 5 months and kept going, like I think that would also just really change the question, because a lot of the people that say their abilities are stronger when they come back already had achieved a certain level of the language, whether that's B2 or whatever it is. And so I think that it's a pretty big question there. And like how much time they spent away is really important. It's like if you come back after a decade, that's very different than if you come back after 6 months. And so it's a pretty hard question to answer definitively, other than the fact that it's like, yeah, it seems like at a certain point, taking a break is beneficial. Anything else you want to add there, or should we move on?
No. I think our answer is we don't know.
Yeah. That's a long way to say that.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you for the question. The next question here comes from Brody, who asks, does mad-libs style speaking work? I've heard of Chinese English learners, so Chinese native English learners, becoming conversational very quickly by practicing basic sentence patterns and switching out words they learned, sort of like mad-libs. I understand that acquiring the language with input is king, but I have a timeline for learning my target language before I move there. I don't need to be a perfectly natural speaker early on. So would practicing some sentence patterns help me to communicate at an ability that's sort of necessary without messing up my abilities long term? Do you have any experience with this sort of output practice?
Yes, I have lots of experience with it. This is how I first tried to learn Spanish. It does work. I was having conversations within about a month of going down this route. They were bad conversations, and like I was very, very slow with them. But this is the whole premise of both Shauma style and the Benny Lewis's style, is to create these or identify these sentence structures that you can just swap words into. And it does work for being able to converse quickly. It did not help at all with understanding. And it is the way you speak is quite formulaic because you have literally created formulas of language. So it's very hard to diverge from them in conversation once you memorize those structures. I found that even after lots of input, I had been practicing those structures so much over the first 6 months of my Spanish learning that they were really ingrained in the way that I spoke. And to this day, I still probably rely on them a little too much, much less so than I used to. And I don't use them in writing. I do still use them in speaking when I just need to like speak very quickly. So they can be very useful, and I would recommend it if you need to speak quickly. I think it's a really powerful way to get into output as quickly as possible without having to worry about the whole essentially improv style of speaking, where you're trying to speak with all of the different grammar simultaneously. Having these strict set phrases or the mad-libs is extremely useful for getting into those conversations and getting to a survival level.
Specifically with Chinese, mentioning a few things, is that it is a pretty analytical language. Okay, it looks like my camera might be dying in a second. It is too hot. Well, okay, bye everybody. Still have comments though.
Do you have another webcam?
So I don't. I can plug in my phone, but that's going to be janky and would take me at least 5 minutes to do. So,
well, as I'm answering the next question, you can do that.
Okay. And I think we talked about this last time, where like what we would do to kind of output more quickly. And a lot of it is still focusing on input first and then doing this kind of style so that you can understand what other people say. And that's a pretty important thing, especially for I assume Mandarin Chinese, because there's a lot of tones are really important, and listening is a lot harder because it's so distant. And so making sure that you can understand their responses and their questions is also going to be very critical for this. And then, like I started to say, and then my camera died, Chinese languages in general tend to be a lot more analytical, which makes this a little more helpful because there's not a ton of changes that happen to words. They are a little bit more, not super, they're a little bit more mad-libable, where you can just change in words and it's actually just correct because you don't have to add an S to the end or inflect anything necessarily. There's still plenty of other very confusing parts about the grammar, but that can be helpful. However, it also is very different, and so you'll need to focus on making sure that people understand you, and so having correct tones is going to be important. There's a bunch of other questions here, which is sort of why, yes, input is still very helpful, even if you're trying to output quickly, because you have to be able to build a slight mental model of the language and can't just rely on a phrase book, because that often doesn't work for communication. I think we talked about this in the last QA. I feel like we talked about this. And so you can go back to the February one and hear our thoughts a bit more on how we'd approach needing to output early for going to the language more in depth. All right, can I push you? I'm just going to leave it like this, and I'll try to plug in my camera. All right, next question. Thank you for that one. This one comes from Dave 5/4, and they ask, does corrected writing help with accuracy? Hello. I've heard some schools of language acquisition, such as TPRS, have language learners write and get their writing corrected when in the output stages. In my output, I have a strong sense for when I'm making mistakes from mostly following Refold or ALG hybrid over the years, but I remain blind to many word and grammar errors, and it seems very difficult to remember to get those correct even when corrected. It seems like I need an intensive output method that gives me feedback on my blind spots in real time and repeatedly. This is the one thing I found ChatGPT useful for. I write out several paragraphs of a journal of Spanish in my journal every day, and I have it correct my errors. This way I can compare what I tried versus what to output versus what the correct version would be. And it plays with I play with qualifiers such as use real spoken Mexican Spanish or European Spanish grammar or whatever, so that it doesn't always use the most academic RAE Spanish in the world. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, this is something that we've talked a lot about internally and with our clients. In order to correct accuracy, you really need to identify the mistakes. And that's very hard to do when you're just speaking in real time. Writing is the easiest way to do it. The ability to see those mistakes and see the corrections and then start to notice patterns of what types of mistakes you're making is really valuable. So, if it's Spanish and you find yourself continuously making errors with the subjunctive, then you can go focus your efforts on the subjunctive. I think part of it is just getting the correction, and the part of it is actually seeking out the answers to why you keep making those mistakes. What is it about those patterns? Or what patterns are you not noticing? So, as you said, ChatGPT can be really, really powerful for that. I use it for that as well. And you can take it a bit further if you want to. You don't need to. But one of the things that I try to do is I'll write it without any correction at all. And then I'll proofread it myself to see what I notice, the errors that I notice. And then I'll put it in either ChatGPT or there's a Chrome extension called Language Tool that gives you real-time feedback. It's like Grammarly, but it does a bunch of different languages. And that can give you spelling and grammar feedback in real time if you do want it in real time. I personally find that if it's correcting me in real time, it interrupts my flow of actually expressing myself, and that's distracting, which is why I separate it into two different activities. One of free flow writing, self-correction, and then correction with either ChatGPT language tool, or you can even send it to a native that's obviously slower and more expensive. So corrected writing definitely does help with accuracy. As you note, though, Writing is not always the way that things are spoken. So corrected speaking is like a whole other category of things that you can do primarily through recording yourself and watching it back for mistakes, or sending those recordings to natives. But getting the corrections is very important for correcting that accuracy over time.
I'll just add that I like to do it live to kind of get the best of both worlds. I'll write something beforehand, then go into a session with somebody and I'll read it aloud, and they can comment on pronunciation errors, things that just sound funky when I say them, or like actual things that I wrote wrong and how it can make more sense to say in this way or whatever it is. And so that's a way that I've enjoyed doing that kind of correction, like you said, sort of in real time. And you can even record those sessions if you want to go back to them later or make Anki cards from them or whatever. Although I didn't do that. It's just theoretically possible. But it's definitely tough to do well, just because like correcting somebody in real time is hard. It's not what we've trained for decades to do. Like speaking just naturally, you often just ignore people's errors if you understand them, because because you just understand them, or natives will focus on like the very last thing, even though you made a much bigger, more important error. They'll be like, oh, that should have an S at the end. You're like, okay, but like, was the idea good? They're like, I didn't really know if your grammar was good because I was focusing on the idea. It's like, oh, yeah.
But yeah, that's why writing is so much easier to correct than speaking.
Exactly. Cool. Well, thank you for the question. And I hope my camera doesn't die again. Next question here is these are all out of order, sorry. Okay, next question here is from Asane, and they ask, how do I, oh my God. Sorry, I hit the question on accident before I read it. How do I choose sentences when mining? I'm a disaster. Apologies. What is a strategy for picking an immersion sentence to go to your SRS? Balancing retention for recognizing in new contexts versus faster and more successful use of an SRS. If you have word audio and sentence audio on the front, do you? This question is a little hard to understand. Do you use the meaning that makes the word more obvious, or a sentence that gives you grammatical context on how it's used without hinting much in the meaning? Until now, I've mostly been just using word audio SRS cards with audio sentences and word meaning on the back to learn words more definitively. But they take extra long for me to recall, and I get more of them wrong during review than if they have a sentence. This is making me have slow reviews that I could otherwise be spending on new words. Now I'm looking for a better strategy, especially for nouns and not easily represented by an image. It's like abstract nouns.
Yeah. There's lots and lots of debate over what the ideal card is. I don't think there is really truly an ideal. I think you kind of got to figure out what works for you. There are people who are militantly vocab on front, definition or sentence on back. There are people who are militantly sentence on front, definition and translation on back. And then some people who are like audio on front, and other people who are like text on front. So those are basically all your potential configurations.
Oh, I'm sure there's many more.
I'm sure there are. There's a bajillion different ones.
Those are the main ones.
Yeah. You can do close cards, you can do production cards, you can do image on the front and word on the back, all sorts of things.
Nothing on the front, everything on the back. No,
so I think in terms of review speed, having a full sentence example on the front is the fastest, whether that is audio or text. Likely text is faster, but with a full sentence, you should be able to, if you've mined it properly, it should be a sentence that you understand automatically. So that's just really just getting exposure to the word. If you are trying to, or if you struggle to recall the word in your immersion, if you're like, I've seen that before, but I don't recognize it because I only remember the sentence that it was in, that's an issue that I've run into with sentence cards, where I don't actually remember what the word means in immersion. Some people will say just do more immersion to correct that. I personally went down the approach of having a vocab on the front so that I was forced to remember it. But I would actually grade myself on if I understood the sentence. So I would do multiple stages where like I would start with the word, see if I could remember it, and then look at the sentence. And if I understood the sentence and the word in context, then it would be fine. But if I didn't, then I would look at the definition. So that's another way that you can do it. You can do multi passes and give yourself different opportunities to recall it, but then grade yourself on just one of those opportunities.
I sort of do that, except I have them both on the front where it's just word and then sentence under it. But I just start by looking at the word, and if I can get it from there, I move on, and if not, then I use the sentence. But
I can't avoid looking,
yeah.
So
that's reasonable.
Anki has this toggle feature, so you can just do a drop down and hide it pretty easily.
I think you just go on the back and you put like hint : and it will do that with any field. Oh, you're saying like adding it with HTML? What, not important.
No, there's a built-in like toggle thing. It's different than hint.
There is?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, Anki's full of surprises, isn't it?
Yep.
Usually bad
lots
ones,
of features.
but in this case, a good one.
But yeah, generally you should be choosing sentences that you understand. It's a new word or it's a new grammar thing, but you understand the sentence. And that will definitely make your card review go a lot faster, especially if you're grading on if you understand the sentence, because you know you do. You mind it because you understood it.
My general theory for Anki is to minimize the time that you spend with it just as much as you possibly can. And so that's why I think that sentence on the front, word on the front is more useful, or at least grading on sentence, because you don't really want to be memorizing a ton more words. Like, you're not really going to be able to understand them quickly and naturally until you've seen them in immersion a bunch anyways. The amount of Anki you do doesn't really make that much better. It just helps you to start to originally learn the word. And so trying to minimize that Anki time while still getting new words in, I think is the most important for that. And then whatever helps you go essentially to spend less time in Anki and more time in your immersion content is good from my point of view.
In my experience, the challenge that I ran into is that I would literally like not even look at the word when I looked at the sentence.
Like you're memorizing the shape of the sentence rather than actually reading it.
Yeah, like the first word of the sentence and the shape would give me the meaning, and I wouldn't even look at the actual word I was trying to test.
Yeah, that you probably should avoid. But like you said, you can put the sentence on the back and the word on the front and still grade on the sentence, since Anki is like you were doing the grading. And so I guess rectifying that, whatever helps you to do your Anki without cheating the most quickly as possible is good.
Yeah, but different people's brains process this information differently.
Exactly.
I also think that some people like really want to remember the word, and putting in the additional effort up front just strengthens the memory so that when they see it in immersion, it can help. So, but each person needs to figure out what the right balance is for them.
Yeah, if you're somebody who will get frustrated by not knowing a word, like you just, even if you're going fast, you probably should remember the word more, just because you're going to get really frustrated and end up hating Anki or immersion or the language even. So everybody will have a slightly different optimal Anki setup probably.
Yeah.
So we didn't really help them with their specific issue, but hopefully that conversation was helpful for fixing your problem. Thank you for the question. And let's do another one here. Question is, how do I keep languages straight in my head? This comes from Cube Master. I've heard that some people say that even at a high level, or maybe especially at a high level, they struggle to keep languages separate in their head. For example, while you're speaking, you might think of words in the wrong language. And how can you mitigate this? Is there a way to avoid translations? And is anything else you can do to make this less of a problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think to some extent this is inevitable. I've never talked to a language learner that was able to fully 100% separate languages in their head, unless they were like heritage speakers of multiple languages. Like they were a heritage speaker and they had their native language as well.
I feel like everybody mixes words. Like
even them,
just words, things will come out. Like I just don't. I think, like you said, it's inevitable, because even when you know a word so deeply, you don't really think about what language it's in. Like when I hear something in English or in Spanish, I can't really like stop myself from understanding it. Like it doesn't really go through a language filter in my brain, even if I'm using the other language. Like I can be writing something in English and hear something in Spanish, and it just goes right in as not as understanding. And I think that just kind of inherently is going to make things mix over time.
What I would say though is that there is something that you experience when you spend a lot of time with language, which is that your brain does switch over to that language being the default for a while. And what I have found is that it is much easier to recall language when you're in that state of mind and much harder to recall other languages when you're in that state of mind, as opposed to if you are, like, if I'm the English state of mind trying to recall Spanish, I will constantly get English. I can also do Spanish, but they get mixed together all the time. But if I actually switch over to Spanish mode, it is much, much easier to recall Spanish and harder to recall English.
Yeah, you can streamline the process somehow in your neurons or whatever, but there's always a little bit there, right?
Yeah. But I think that this concept of really switching to a different language mode is something that you should try and do. I don't know how much time that you have on a day-to-day basis, but generally more time, you can switch over more easily. And then even today, if I'm speaking Spanish, it will take me 20 minutes to switch over into Spanish mode. And once I'm there, it's much easier to keep going, and everything starts to flow a lot better. But there's that initial build-up time, the initial transition time that's quite difficult.
There's more there's more crossed wires in that time.
Yeah. So if you can do anything to reduce that time or make it easier to switch, that's where I think you'll see the most benefit in trying to keep the languages separate rather than trying to sort of operate in either a dual language mode or operating in one language mode but trying to recall from another language.
I'll also add that when people are very new in a language, it's really common for other languages to butt in and be like, here's your other thing. Here's the word you're looking for. It's like, wrong language, get out of here. And that's especially common for people that are learning like a third or fourth language, because you can kind of shut off your native language or the languages that you're super fluent in, but your brain, for some reason, like will often supply words from a language that you're maybe not even that good at, but those words will come up more readily, which is just a very strange thing. It's not that common, and it goes away with just actually immersing in the language more and becoming just more comfortable with it, and you turning it like Ethan said, turning on your language mode. But that can also happen. If it happens, don't worry about it. It'll go away. You'll get better. Cool. Thank you for the question. And
I do need to drop off a little bit early today. So I wanted to see if there were any questions in the chat in YouTube that we can answer live.
Sure. Does anybody have any final question here to round out our March Q&A? I do have a quick one here. If we don't have anything else, I haven't seen anything in the chat.
Okay.
So let's look at this question, and it's basically, how do you maintain a language when starting a new one? I'm getting to the point where I'm satisfied with my Spanish level, and I'm ready to start with some French. I will not be doing ungodly amounts of Duolingo, but what's a good way to maintain Spanish on a daily basis, and how can you not have it like right into your other language learning time?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you've achieved a pretty high level in the language, it's pretty much there for life. It will decay over time, but as long as you do a little bit to maintain it, it should be fine. The way that I would maintain it is by speaking occasionally and also doing some input occasionally. So if French is really where you're putting in all of your time and energy, but you still have some relaxation time and you can relax with Spanish, then continuing to watch some TV in Spanish or watching YouTube in Spanish or reading a book in Spanish, just in your downtime, and then giving yourself an opportunity to use it relatively frequently will also help just keep it fresh in your mind and maintain it. As mentioned, like, you will start to confuse things with French. You'll start to put things from French into Spanish. Fortunately, they share so much language, it's probably fine. But basically light touches, light connection with Spanish should be enough to maintain it.
Yeah, if you can, mixing in Spanish just to your regular, whatever your native language is, your English stuff can be nice. So like if you finish a book in English, maybe go, all right, I'll read my next book in Spanish. Or if you can, just subscribe to a bunch of YouTube channels on YouTube in Spanish as well, so that they just come up in your timeline and you can just connect with the language here and there, just to sort of keep it constantly fresh. So you don't go one day, oh yeah, I speak Spanish as well. That would just be, that's like the only thing that you can really, the only way you can mess this up is like by just completely forgetting about it. And
Even
so,
then, I think it still sticks around.
yeah, it can come back very easily.
Yeah, I took a multi-year break from Spanish, and when I came back, I was not substantially worse from when I left.
Well, speaking of leaving, I think that is enough for the stream today. You have to hop into some meetings.
I do.
But thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for the answers, Ethan, and thank you to the community for questions. If you have any questions or just curiosities about language learning, immersion learning, please put them in the Discord, and we will talk about them in April, which is the next live stream, which will happen in about a month. And we're really looking forward to seeing you then. Anything to sign off with, Ethan?
No, that's it.
Awesome.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks everybody in the crowd.
Yes.